Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathashala. I am Dr. Shivasenani from University of Hyderabad, Department of Sanskrit Science. Today in the paper Vedic, Epic and Puranic Culture of India, we study the module Arthaśāstra. In this module, our learning objectives are to be introduced to the book Arthaśāstra, its author, subject matter, time, etc. And within the book, we will consider a few topics, mainly public administration, the mandala theory, the 6 measures of foreign policy, also called Shadgunyam, the constituent elements of the states or the Sapta Prakritis, and at the end we will consider the relevance of Arthaśāstra in modern times. In fact, that's the way this presentation is, this module is arranged in 3 parts. First is introduction, second one is the contents of Arthaśāstra, so that we get a familiarity with this particular book, and then we will examine its relevance in the modern context. Let us start with the introduction. The name is Arthaśāstra. It's also called the Kautaliya Arthaśāstra or the Chanakya Sutram. We need to be careful here to differentiate it from the Chanakya Niti. Chanakya Niti is an anthology or a collection of aphorisms, whereas Chanakya Sutram refers to the book Arthaśāstra. It is also called as Dandaniti, and this is one of the 18 Vidyas enumerated in the traditional lists. If you are wondering what the 18 Vidyas are, the slokas go like this: Angani Vedas Chatvaro Mimamsa Nyaya Vistaraha Puranam Dharmashastrancha Vidya Hyete Chaturtasha Ayurvedo Dhanurvedo Gandharvas Chet Chanukramat Arthaśāstram Parantasmat Vidya Hashtadasha Smritaha. So these are the 18 Vidyasthanas, that is the 4 Vedas, the 6 Vedangas, and then Nyaya, Mimamsa, Purana and Dharmashastram. These make the 14. On top of the 14, another 4 are added: Ayurveda, Dhanurveda, Gandharva Veda, that is music, and also Arthaśāstram. This is the 18th Vidyasthana. Traditional subject of learning. It has been traditionally reserved for the ruling class. The book itself was known through references but was lost to us for a long time. It was discovered in 1905 by Arthaśāstra in Mysore and published by him in 1909. He provided an English translation in 1915, and then in 1924 T. Ganapati Shastri of Kerala also published this with his own Sanskrit commentary. These were the first publications of the book. Later, about 40-45 years later, Professor R.P. Kangle, he did about 30 years of research into Arthaśāstra and produced the definitive version of the text in 3 volumes. Regarding the name of the author, in traditional circles, the name Kautilya is also popular, but following Ganapati Shastri Garu, we use the word Kautilya here rather than Kautilya. Regarding Chanakya, it is said that he has helped his king Chandragupta Maurya. He has also ended the reign of Nandas and also given us the Arthaśāstra. This is given in the Arthaśāstra book itself in this shloka. Yena shastram cha shastram cha nandarajagata cha bhuhu amarshena udhrutanyashu tena shastramidam krutam. By whom Shastra, Shastra and also the Nandarajagata bhuhu, the land occupied by Nanda, all these were rescued by him instantaneously. By such a Chanakya, this Shastra is being written. So we know that from this that he is the minister of Chandragupta Maurya, that he helped him overthrow Nandas and ascend the throne. The life history of Chanakya has been the subject matter of the drama called Mudra Rakshasam in Sanskrit. He is also held to be the author of Chanakya Niti, but then it's a collection. So we don't deal with Chanakya Niti in this module, we focus on Arthaśāstra only. 4th century BC is the time based on the assigned date of Chandragupta Maurya. We have references of this book in other Sanskrit works like Dashakumara Charitam of Dandi. In the Tamil book Tirukkural, the second Kural also draws from this particular text. So these are the connections of later literature with this particular thing. We can take the date to be around 4th century BC. This book is divided into 15 adhikaranas. Each adhikarana has many adhyayas. In total there are 150 adhyayas. Each adhyaya has many sutras. In total, there are 5,370 sutras, but it is simply said as a 6,000 sutra book. Normally, that is how it is referred to as. The purpose of Chanakya was twofold. Artha means wealth, or in the case of kings, wealth is kingdom. So, the science of how to win a kingdom and how to rule it properly so that it prospers. So, this is a subject matter. How do I win a kingdom and how do I rule it? Again, in winning a kingdom, there is theory and practice. So, there is a theory of international relations, and also military strategy is also covered by him in the later part. So, this is the structure of the book. The first 5 adhikaranas deal with how to rule the kingdom so that it prospers. The second part, 9 adhikaranas, deal with how to conduct foreign affairs and how to conduct military campaigns so that one wins newer and newer parts of the kingdom. The last adhikarana deals with what are known as tantra yuktis. We will deal with them at the end. So now that we have introduced the broad structure of the book, its author, its time, let us look at the salient features of the contents of the book. I will give you an overview first and then take you through some of the topics such as training of the prince, administration of the state, the mandala theory, 6 measures of foreign policy, 7 prakritis, tantra yuktis, and also other topics. You have a summary of all the topics covered given as in a tabular form. The 15 adhikaranas deal with first is the training of prince, second is the activity of heads of departments, third is the one concerning judges, fourth it deals with suppression of criminals, and fifth is the one dealing with secret conduct, that is of spies, etc. These 5 together form the first part, which is the administration or public administration. The second part starts with the mandala theory, wherein the circle of kings as the basis is given in the 6th adhikarana. Then the Shadgunyam or 6 measures of foreign policy are covered. Then details are entered into with the concerning the topic of calamities in the 8th adhikarana. Then military issues are taken up in the 9th adhikarana, dealing with the activity of king about to march. Then the other adhikaranas deal mainly with war, that is concerning war, policy towards principalities, concerning the weaker king, means of taking a fort, concerning secret practices. The last 14th adhikarana is about doing rites and passages, which are like black magic, which are designed to bring downfall of the enemy and which are also designed to protect the king against that. The 15th adhikarana deals with tantra yuktis. So these are the broad chapters or adhikaranas within the book. Let us start with the first salient topic called the training of the prince. Here the text deals with training of the prince in 21 adhyayas. It starts with a list of the contents of the work. This is one particular tantra yukti, that is a device of doing science or how do you deal with a particular thing. First is just list all the topics, that is what is done. This essentially means it is a syllabus for the king's training. Some of the important observations that we can note here are the position of Arthaśāstra is that Veda lays down the dharma. So, it is very clear that Arthaśāstra is a Vedic book which has Veda as its main support. So, all dharma flows from Veda. This is what is reiterated by the Arthaśāstra. The main dharmas which are common to all are listed, which are non-violence, ahimsa, satyam, that is truth, shaucham, purity, anasuya, non-spiteful, anrusamshya, kindness, and kshama, forbearance. These are the dharmas which are common to all. This is what the Arthaśāstra teaches. Another thing that we could note is that the king shall not allow people to deviate from their duty. That is, it is the duty of the king to uphold dharma. Here we also are introduced to the Matsya Nyaya, which is very popular. This is the maxim of the fish, wherein the bigger fish eats the smaller fish. The might is the right is what we call in English for this. So what happens when a king does not rule properly or there is no king? Anarchy prevails where might is the right and the weaker people are harassed by the stronger people. One of the interesting topics given in the training of princes is restraint of sense organs. Normally it is said that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So first thing a prince is trained in is in restraint of sense organs. We could do well to include this in the syllabus of our modern rulers. This was there in a text which is 2500 years old. The pedagogy of Arthaśāstra is through stories. There are various stories told because a dry, boring, theoretical manual would be very boring. So the princes are told about stories of Janmejaya, Ravana, Duryodhana, Kartavirya, Arjuna, etc. Through these stories, the principles of Dandaniti or Arthaśāstra are taught to them. The ideal is the Rajarshi, one who has control of his senses. And this has been the ideal not merely in Arthaśāstra but in related literature. We see, for example, in Kalidasa that Dushyanta is a Rajarshi. This is the ideal that kings strove to achieve, and that's what Arthaśāstra aims in its training of the prince. There are other issues like desirable qualities in officers of the civil service. There is meritocracy is prescribed rather than based on relationships, etc. Then one interesting topic is that corruptibility is actively tested. Is this person corruptible? That's the kind of test they prescribed in those days. The other topics dealt with here are secret service, watching over and winning over enemies parties, the rules of council, that is mantranam, rules for envoys and ambassadors, protection of princes and protection from princes. This is an interesting one. Princes are seen as a danger to the king. History bears this out, where so many kings have killed their own fathers. Within Chandragupta Maurya's dynasty, we see that by the time of Ashoka, this fratricide has happened. So Arthaśāstra anticipates this. Maybe it was prevalent at that time. It also deals with protection of the king from the prince. We also have duties and ideal timetable for a king. Those who are interested can consult the work and learn more about this. We'll end this topic with one shloka from Arthaśāstra. Praja sukhe sukham rajñah prajanam cha hite hitam. Natma priyam hitam rajñah prajanam tu priyam hitam. Happiness of the king lies in the happiness of people and his welfare in theirs. That which is dear to the king is not what is beneficial to him. Rather, that which is dear to the people is beneficial to the king. What more do we want than our rulers to have this, to take this to heart and then be ready to rule? So this we've seen is the training of princes. We'll go to the next one within public administration, that is the administration itself. This is the largest adhikarana and has material not found elsewhere in contemporary text and even in much later texts. Very detailed information is available in this particular adhikarana. We'll quickly go through them. First, formation of villages with 100 to 500 families is discussed. You will be interested to know that 500 families still would be about the average size of a village 2500 years later. Then the division of land for various purposes is dealt with, that is zonal planning. There are also chapters on construction and layout of forts, the duties of superintendent of treasury and revenue, and so on. 6 sources of revenue are recognized from the fort, that is the city, from the countryside, irrigation works, forests, cattle and trade routes. Then we have various adhyayas dealing with duties of accounts officers, chapters dealing with embezzlement of funds and rules on disgorgement of funds. Nowadays we are no longer doing it, but earlier if somebody was found embezzling funds, the investigation ended with disgorging the funds as well, that is taking the funds back. Corruption of government officers has been recognized as inevitable, so the king is advised to be always in control. There are also chapters on royal edicts which shows that Arthaśāstra is familiar with Nirukta and Vyakaranam, the 2 Vedangas. It is not a surprise, but it gives the relative dating of Arthaśāstra. Then the 4 upayas are dealt with here. These are very popularly known. Sama, Dana, Bheda, Dandopayas. An upaya is a device used to achieve the purpose and then removed. It is like a scaffolding that we build before building the building. Once the building is ready, we remove the scaffolding. Similarly, an upaya is like that. So, to get something done, these are the 4 devices that are taught by Kautilya, that is Sama, Dana he calls it as Upapradana, later on he calls it as Dana as well, Bheda and Danda. Sama is reconciliation, Dana is trying to give something, Bheda is creation of doubt and use of threats, and then finally Danda is the punishment, that is the last resort. Within the administration of the state, if you just look at the list of the departments, we'll understand that not much has changed. The departments dealt with are mines, goldsmithy, trade in gold, granary, commerce, forest produce, armory, weights and measures, measures of space and time, tolls and toll dues, weavers, liquor, slaughterhouse, courtesans, shipping, horses, cattle and elephants, chariots, infantry and commander, passports, city and rural administration. It's amazing that after 2 millennia, these remain more or less the main aspects of administration. What has happened is, of late, the services part of the economy has grown a lot, but we are lucky that we have a detailed manual of all these departments available to us, dating from 4th century BC. Another noteworthy point is, it's not a mere list. When Chanakya is dealing with any particular subject, he gives exhaustive details. Let us just consider one example. He is dealing with, for example, the chapter on treasury. In treasury, various things come. Money comes, granary, jewels. So within jewels, he gives the names and qualities of various gems, the descriptions and names of various necklaces, and the names and qualities of fine textiles. That is, the treasury in charge must know all goods of value. He must be able to value them properly. And that kind of detail we find about each and every department in this book. It is not a wonder then that the German translator Johann Jakob Meyer said that Arthaśāstra is not a book but a library. That is, in each adhyaya it is worth a book, and this is a collection of so many books. We can go into more details, but the present context does not permit that. This gives us a glimpse of the kind of detail and the theory of public administration that we find in Arthaśāstra. Now we go to the other part of the book on how to win a kingdom. The important contribution of Arthaśāstra not only to Indian literature, Indian thought, but world literature is its mandala theory. Let us examine that in some detail. This is taken up in the 6th Adhikarana. This theory imagines a mandala or circle of kings based primarily on geographic positions, identifies them as allies and enemies, and then devises foreign relations strategy based on that. There is some division of opinion amongst authors whether Kautilya describes all neighbors as enemies. R.P. Kangle, the professor who studied Arthaśāstra in the greatest depth, opines that is not the case. But then consider this. Kautilya knew that the king's son could be the king's enemy. If the son himself is not trusted, will the neighbor be trusted? The neighbor has all incentive to harm the king. So it is not a surprise that generally he describes neighbors as enemies, but then this is what we call paranoia, which is very common amongst leaders. Leaders are supposed to be always on the guard. Let us look at the mandala theory. I have given a brief depiction of the mandala of kings. This mandala is partial and expands only in one direction. If you look at the hexagon in the roughly middle or slightly to the left of the center of the screen, the grey hexagon represents the Vijigishu, or the would-be conqueror, that is the present king. Everybody around him are in neighbors. The 6 hexagons immediately in contact with the grey one. 3 of them I have shown in red, 3 of them I have shown in orange or yellow, that it might appear on your screens. These are the neutral ones, and the red ones are the enemies. They are called Ari. Ari is a Sanskrit word for enemy. So a king, whoever is his neighbor, there could be 2 neighbors, 6 neighbors, we don't know. All of them are either enemies or have potential to be enemies. Now look at the second layer, which is the people beyond the first arc of red. They are in blue, that is, they are the neighbors of neighbors. Now these are described as Mitram, allies, friend by Chanakya. That is, your enemy's enemy is your friend. Again, you note that not all of them need to be like that, some of them could be neutral. Similarly, we go to the third layer, that is the neighbor of the neighbor of neighbor. He is called Arimitram, that is friend of the enemy. Initially, the first level neighbor is the enemy, second level neighbor is the friend because he is your enemy's enemy. The third level is the friend of the enemy based on similar logic, and so on it goes on. So this is the Rajamandala. Based on this Rajamandala, Kautilya identifies 12 types of kings. We will see the 12 names first, and then we will see how these 12 names contribute to strategy. The 12 kings are Vijigishu, the one desirous of conquering, Ari, the enemy, the Madhyama, that is, he is close to Vijigishu and also the enemy. This Madhyama is capable of helping them and also capable of suppressing them when they are not united. Apart from the Madhyama, there is another Udasina. There is a difference between the Udasina and the Madhyama. Udasina is the outside the spheres of influence of all the above three, but capable of helping them and also capable of suppressing them. These are some kind of neutral parties. You think of India and Pakistan and maybe Iran or China, and then there is a Mitra, an ally, and an Arimitra, the friend of enemy. These are the 6 types of basic kings. Another 6 are Mitra Mitra, friend of friend, Arimitra Mitra, friend of enemy. And then we get into some technical names: Parshnigraha, enemy at the rear; Akranda, friend at the rear; and Parshnigrahasara, friend of the enemy at the rear. So Akrandasara is friend of the friend at the rear. The rest of the 8 are in the forward. So we have 12 types of kings. Now each king has 7 prakritis, including himself. One of the prakritis is allies, so they are covered here. If you remove them, there are 6 relevant prakritis. 12 kings with 6 relevant prakritis are constituent elements of the kingdom, which are minister, country, fort, the treasury and army. These 72 elements become the building blocks of analyzing your foreign policy. Policy decisions have to be based on the relative strengths of these 72 elements. To give an example, you think of again India, Pakistan. I said the king of Pakistan is a prime minister, but the army is stronger there in the current position. So one has to look at every element of the kingdom and not merely the king, the minister, the kind of country it is, rich, poor, etc., the defenses, that is fort, the treasury, and also their army. Once we analyze all the 72 elements, foreign policy evolves by itself. This then represents the Indian contribution to the theory of international relations. Hindsight is cruel, but just looking back, was it the lack of skepticism about China's friendship that cost us the war in 1962? I'm just thinking, think about it. Now that we've seen the mandalas, let us look at what happens. After all the analysis, finally we need to do something, right? That's the point of action. There are 6 actions identified. These are called the 6 measures of foreign policy. What can a king do after his analysis? He can have peace, sandhi. He can go to war, vigraha. He can remain neutral, that is called asana, sitting. He can march, that is, he is not yet at war, but he is threatening, that is mobilization of troops, that is called yana. He can surrender to somebody, samshraya, surrender to a more powerful king. Or he need not decide, he can decide, he can have war with one and peace with another. This is called dvaidhi bhava. Now if you look at the non-aligned movement, it is basically asana. We wanted not to be aligned with either USA or USSR in those days. So these 6 then are the measures of foreign policy. They are also called Shadgunya, and this is very popular in Sanskrit literature and later terms also. This then is India's contribution to international relations. The way these are discussed is, we start with very simple propositions. For example, if one is weaker than the enemy, then what should one do? One should make peace, one should not go and fight. If one is very strong and prospering, then one should make war and annex the next kingdom. Like this, we start with simple propositions which are commonsensical, and then Kautilya deals with more and more complex situations. In all this, the king's decision making is based on 2 rules, which is, the king should take a decision which would further his interests the most. Second, the king should avoid the course of action which would ruin his projects or strength. Nothing else should decide our foreign policy, right? The decision should be based only on these 2 particular criteria. This is the theory of Chanakya. There are 18 adhyayas here in the 6 measures of foreign policy. Second adhyaya deals with conduct of kings seeking to surrender. Third one prescribes policies for the weaker king. Fourth discusses neutrality after war and peace. And the next 3 discuss different consideration scenarios on marching and dual policy. And the 8th adhyaya treats the conduct of a king about to be attacked. The different scenarios are covered. 9 to 12 are devoted to various treaties, how to get into treaties, how to deal with alliances, etc. So this is hardcore international relationships. The last 6 adhyayas describe strategy to tackle with the enemy at rear, recoupment of diminished powers, defense of a fort, the conduct of an attacking king, peace negotiations, and conduct towards a Madhyama king or an Udasina king and the circle of kings. How should a king be to all these particular neighbors? As I said before, the various scenarios are discussed strictly in the framework of what is beneficial to the kingdom, and they do not exhaust all the possibilities. They can get very complicated. So this has been a favorite hunting ground or subject of exploration for Sanskrit poets. So we see that in the first and second sargas of Kirata Arjuniyam, there is a Mahakavyam by Bharavi, where the particular situation between Yudhishthira and Duryodhana is explored by the poet. Yudhishthira has gone to forest for his forest stay. Then what should Duryodhana do? Should he sit tight? Duryodhana actually goes about making friends. And Bhima and Draupadi goad Yudhishthira into making war right now, because if Duryodhana builds up his strength, then it might become difficult. So we see Shadgunyam at play here. Similarly, in the second sarga of Shishupala Vadham, the poet Magha similarly explores the various considerations in the decision making of kings. And of course, now we see that within South Asia, all our neighbors seem to be against India. India has helped Bangladesh get freedom, but Bangladesh feels India is not on their side. So this is the real politic. This is what is dealt with by in Arthaśāstra. Given all these complexities, Kautilya says that anybody who knows Arthaśāstra, he can simply play with his king. He toys with kings as if they are bound by his intellect. So for him, mastery of this Shadgunya makes the minister very, very powerful, and it is not really a wonder. Nowadays we want our kings only to be masters of this particular craft. We briefly touched about the 7 prakritis or the 7 constituent elements of the kingdom. They are Swami, the king; Amatya, the minister; Janapada, the country; Durga, fort; Kosha, treasury; Danda, army; and Mitrani, allies or friends. And the relative importance of each of these is in the order stated, that is, king is the most important, second most important is minister, and so on. The book describes each of these 7 elements in some great detail at various places. Some people did not understand why they are scattered, but then they are covered in the book. Each of these prakritis along with the king get to play in the Rajamandala, because we said that there are 12 kings and we should look at 6 prakritis. Allies are not counted because they are included in the Rajamandalam. The evaluation of these prakritis leads to one of the 6 measures of foreign policy. In a given situation, after evaluating all 72 elements, finally the king makes a decision. Okay, now we need to go to war with X or Y. We need to make peace with Z, etc. Having dealt with these prakritis, a separate adhyaya is also devoted to calamities to these particular prakritis. This is the main text. We will also briefly observe one more thing called the Tantra Yuktis. These are the stylistic devices of explaining something, to elucidate a scientific subject. Ayurveda and Arthaśāstra give 32 Tantra Yuktis. In Arthaśāstra, all the Tantra Yuktis have examples given from the text itself. We will deal with 2 examples here, Purva Paksha and Uttara Paksha. I have chosen these 2 because they are very popular across ancient Indian literature, not merely in statecraft but in philosophy as well. We will consider the Sutra 15.1.53. That statement which is fit to be rejected is the Purva Paksha. That is, it is the opponent's view. We state the opponent's view, convince the reader that opponent is right, and then we reject it. The statement of opponent's view is called Purva Paksha. What is a Purva Paksha? Sutra 8.1.7 proposes that calamities of a minister are greater than those of a king. Some people might think Chandragupta Maurya was not a strong king, Chanakya was a great king, so if Chanakya had fever or some deadly disease, then that's a bigger calamity. It is plausible. This is the view of Bharadvaja. The reasons given by Bharadvaja are most projects or activities in the kingdom are undertaken by ministers, and if these are suspended, kingdom is weakened, enemy would attack and the life of king is at threat. It seems plausible. This is the view of the opponent. Opponent as in not an enemy, but somebody who takes a different stance. Now Kautilya refutes this view in 8.1.12 and gives the reasons. It is the king who appoints ministers, takes countermeasures, etc. He can always appoint a minister who is not indisposed, and so on. Basically, what is Kautilya's view? If the king is not strong and good, then he cannot pick a wise minister. Therefore, a king has to be the one who should come first. Therefore, he says in 8.1.19, because he is at the head of the Prakritis. The above is called Uttara Paksha, which is defined as the statement giving the final position. So, we see that Tantra Yukti is a way of scientific elucidation or discussing any scientific matter, any systematic discussion of any particular matter. Like this 32 Tantra Yuktis are given in the 15th chapter. Before ending the salient features, we will just deal with the other topics in Arthaśāstra so that we get an idea. War is discussed at length in 4 adhikaranas, including activities of a king about to march, battle tactics and vyuhas, tactics for a king battling a more powerful king, strategies to capture a fort. These are definitely outdated today because they never had air force in those days. The kind of missiles and ballistic missiles, intercontinental ballistic missiles we have, nuclear bombs we have. So this is no longer that important, but maybe in a low intensity war that like what we are seeing on a northwestern border, this could still be relevant. The adhikaranas on war include an adhyaya on restoration of peace in a conquered country. We've seen that great powers in the 21st century and the 20th century are conquering countries, and then what is the state of Iraq today? I mean, is Afghanistan stable? So these were considered in those times. One adhikarana is devoted to sanghas, small independent principalities, especially of the warrior class. This is a reflection of the organization of various states and groups in those days. The 14th adhikarana deals with abhichara rights and precautions against such rights. Abhichara rights are rights conducted not for the welfare of the yajamana, but for the downfall of the opponent. So, if we to just recap, summarize what we have seen, in Arthaśāstra we have 2 main parts. One is public administration. The second part is dealing with foreign relations and military strategy. In foreign relations, the contribution of Arthaśāstra is unique to both Indian thought and also the world, and it stays relevant today. Military strategy may no longer be relevant. From a historical point of view, the amount of detail we have available in Arthaśāstra gives us an excellent picture of the state of the administration at the time of Chanakya, which is about 4th century BC, at least according to the current view. Such being the book, how relevant is it today? Let us just consider that. This is a manual meant for the ruling class. It is very clear it is not meant for everybody, right? What is the ruling class today? The ruling class today is IAS officers, politicians, and other officers of the state. Many of the ideas and frameworks permeate the thinking of Indians. If the ruling class wants to rule India using concepts known to Indians, this is a very relevant book. The revenue system, bureaucracy and the police system described in Arthaśāstra were followed by all Hindu kings till about 400 years ago, says K.M. Panikkar. My submission is that this is an invaluable text for civil service officers, especially the Indian foreign service officers and envoys, for military officers, politicians, and also useful for historians. Let us end on one note. Sun Tzu's The Art of War, another excellent book of a similar vintage. He studied not merely the Chinese military officers, but others as well. Even in the US military academies, it's a prescribed text. Then why are we not prescribing Arthaśāstra in our own IAS training academies and IFS training academies? think about it. It's a wonderful book, has a lot of material which is relevant to us and gives an excellent or a very rich view of some of the details not available elsewhere about ancient India. Thank you.